There are some things you find in life that are difficult to throw away. Not because they are valuable. Sometimes it's because you don't know what they mean. That was exactly what happened to Thomas on a Tuesday afternoon in October. He was looking for a book. Not an important book, not even a particularly interesting one. He had simply left his apartment without wanting to go home yet, walked 3 blocks in the rain, and ended up at the old public library. Thomas had been doing that a lot lately, finding places where he could sit without anyone asking him what was wrong. He walked along the shelves until he found a book about the history of the city. He pulled it out. Something fell from between the pages, a folded piece of paper. Thomas looked around. Nobody seemed to notice. He picked it up and unfolded it. There was no name, just a list. 10 lines. Call your mother. Return the watch. Apologize to Thomas. Thomas stopped. He read the 3rd line again. Apologize to Thomas. He almost laughed. Very funny. But nobody was standing nearby. He continued. Sell the house, don't take the train. Visit the old restaurant. Give the envelope to the woman in blue. Wait until Thursday. Don't tell anyone. And finally, forgive yourself. Thomas stared at the paper for a few seconds. It was strange, not frightening, just strange. He turned it over. Nothing. No handwriting on the back. No initials. No date. He looked at the book. Maybe someone had left the list there years ago. Maybe it was part of some personal story. Maybe the person who wrote it had simply forgotten it. Thomas folded it again and put it in his coat pocket. Then he went home. By the time he reached his apartment, he had forgotten about it. Almost. The next morning, while making coffee, he saw the paper on the kitchen counter. He picked it up. He read the 1st line. Call your mother. Thomas hadn't spoken to his mother in 11 months. There had been no dramatic argument. That would have been easier. They had simply stopped calling. 1 missed call became 2. 2 became a week, then a month. After a while, calling felt awkward. And the longer he waited, the harder it became to explain why he had waited. Thomas looked at his phone. He opened his contacts. His mother's name was still there. He stared at it. Then he locked the screen. Not today. He put the list away. 3 days later, something else happened. Thomas was cleaning out a drawer when he found an old watch, a silver watch. He hadn't seen it in years. It belonged to his father. His father had given it to him shortly before Thomas moved away. Thomas had promised to return it to his younger brother after their father's funeral. He never did. Not because he wanted the watch. He just never returned it. The promise had become buried under other things. Work, moving, arguments, life. Thomas put the watch on the table. Then he looked at the list. Return the watch. He felt a small chill. Not because it was impossible, because it was specific. He folded the list and put it back in the drawer. That evening, he called his brother. They talked for 12 minutes, mostly about ordinary things, the weather, work, their father's garden. Neither mentioned the watch. Before hanging up, Thomas said, I found Dad's watch. There was a pause. His brother said, I wondered where that went. Thomas smiled. I'll bring it over. When the call ended, Thomas sat quietly for a while. Then he took out the list. 2 things. 2 strange coincidences. Nothing more. Until he reached the 3rd line. Apologized to Thomas. This time he didn't laugh, because Thomas was his name. He spent the rest of the evening trying to think of someone who might have written it. Maybe a friend, maybe his brother, maybe someone who knew him very well. But there was another problem. The handwriting wasn't familiar, and the paper looked old. The next day, Thomas went back to the library. He found the book. He checked the card inside the cover. The book had been borrowed only twice in the last 6 years. The librarian searched the records. The most recent borrower had been an elderly man named Arthur Bell. Thomas didn't know him. He asked if Arthur was still around. The librarian shook her head. He passed away last winter. Thomas thanked her. Before leaving, he asked, Do you know why he borrowed this book? The librarian thought for a moment. He used to come here quite often. What was he like? She smiled. Quiet. Then she added, he always returned things early. Thomas smiled politely. He was about to leave when she said, actually, he used to sit by the window. Why? I don't know. He liked watching people. Thomas looked toward the window. Rain tapped against the glass. Did he ever write anything? The librarian laughed. Everyone writes something. Thomas left. For the next few days, the list stayed in his pocket. He started noticing things. Not supernatural things, just details. The sort of details you normally ignore. On Thursday morning, he remembered the 8th line. Wait until Thursday. He checked the date. Thursday. He had no idea what he was supposed to wait for. So he went to work. At 11:15, nothing happened. At noon, nothing happened. At 2, still nothing. He almost felt embarrassed by himself. Then at 4:40, his phone rang. It was his brother. Did you ever hear from Mark? Thomas frowned. Mark? The guy you used to work with. Thomas hadn't spoken to Mark in years. Why? He called me. Thomas sat up. What? He said he was trying to reach you. Thomas stared at the list. Why? His brother hesitated. He said he found something that belonged to Dad. Thomas's stomach tightened. What? I don't know. He wouldn't tell me. Thomas called Mark. No answer. He called again. Nothing. Then a message arrived. I'm at the old restaurant. Come when you can. Thomas stared at the screen. The old restaurant. Line 6. Visit the old restaurant. For the first time, Thomas wondered whether he should throw the list away. Instead, he drove there. The restaurant had changed. The sign was different. The windows were newer. But the back room looked almost exactly the same. Mark was sitting at a table. He stood when Thomas entered. They shook hands. It was awkward. They hadn't spoken in 7 years. Mark put an envelope on the table. This was in my father's things. Thomas looked at him. Why is it mine? Mark pushed the envelope toward him. Because your father gave it to my father. Thomas opened it. Inside was a photograph. Thomas and his father. Thomas was about 20. They were standing beside a car, both looking annoyed at the camera. Thomas smiled. He had forgotten that day. There was also a short note, his father's handwriting. Only 3 sentences. You were angry with me that day. I was angry with you, too. I don't remember why anymore. Thomas read it twice, then a third time. He looked at Mark. When did your father get this? Years ago. Why didn't he give it to me? Mark shrugged. He probably forgot. Thomas folded the note. For some reason, that answer felt right. Not everything had a meaningful explanation. Some things were simply forgotten. Some apologies never happened. Some conversations ended because people assumed there would always be another chance. Thomas drove home in silence. That night, he took out the list. There were only 2 lines left. Don't tell anyone. Forgive yourself. He sat at the kitchen table. He had spent the entire week trying to understand the list. Who wrote it? How did they know? Why did certain things seem to match his life? But now he noticed something he hadn't noticed before. The first 9 lines weren't really predictions. They were unfinished things. Things he had already been carrying. His mother, the watch, his brother, the house, the train, the restaurant, the envelope, Thursday. None of those things had magically appeared because someone had written them down. They were already there. The list hadn't predicted his life. It had simply pointed at the parts of it he'd been avoiding. Thomas looked at the final line. Forgive yourself. He almost crossed it out. It sounded too neat, too much like the ending of a motivational story. So he didn't. Instead, he put the list on the table and went to bed. The next morning, he called his mother. She answered on the fourth ring. "Hello?" Thomas didn't know what to say, so he said the first honest thing that came to mind. "I've been meaning to call you for a long time." His mother was quiet. Then she said, "I know." Thomas smiled. They talked for almost an hour. Afterward, he drove to his brother's house and returned the watch. Then he went home. He took the list out one last time. He turned it over. Still nothing. No name, no explanation. He considered putting it back in the book, but instead, he took a pen. Under the final line, he wrote something. Then he folded the paper. Months later, Thomas returned to the library. He found the same book. He opened it and placed the folded paper between the pages. The librarian saw him. "Leaving something?" Thomas nodded. "Someone might find it." She smiled. "What does it say?" Thomas thought about telling her. Then he shook his head. Nothing important. He put the book back on the shelf and walked away. The list had never told Thomas what would happen to him. It had done something much simpler. It had made him stop long enough to notice what was already happening. And perhaps that is the strange thing about life. We keep waiting for something to tell us what to do. A sign, a perfect opportunity, the right person, the right moment. But sometimes the answer isn't waiting somewhere ahead of us. Sometimes it's sitting quietly inside the things we've been postponing. Thomas never discovered who wrote the list. But the sentence he added before putting it back in the book was simple. It wasn't another instruction. It was a question. What will you leave unfinished if you keep waiting for the right time? And somewhere, perhaps, another person will open that book one day, find the list, read the first line, and make a phone call they have been avoiding. Maybe that's all the list was ever meant to do. If this story made you think, subscribe to The Better Self for more stories with a lesson. And if you enjoyed it, leave a like. Thanks for watching.